The genesis for this video was that I was sleeping and, sometimes I wake up at like 3 in the morning. I've talked about this before. I wake up at 3 in the morning and I can't stop thinking. So whether it's a consultation project that I'm involved in, things that I could do on that project, or it's just stuff in my own house, expanding the front yard food forest. I came up with a lot of good ideas there as well. I'll wake up at like 3 in the morning. I can't get back to sleep. Well, a couple days ago that happened and couldn't get back to sleep. And I started thinking, how else can I leverage my engineering knowledge and my engineering degree and like 16, 17, 18 years of working in the engineering industry now. One of those ways is plastic. Now, just before we get started, I do want to say, I just did the video, edited it, and sometimes when I make a video, I don't talk about some of the, the overarching bigger things. I just want to quickly touch on some of these right up front. First off is that I personally don't believe that there's any amount of plastic that's correct to use in a garden. I don't use any myself. If I can avoid it, I do. I just want to get that out of the way. This video was more meant to be that I do know a lot of people do use plastic, and there's very poor choices that you can use in the plastics that you choose, and often people do actually use these things. And even worse, they use them as greenhouses that heat up and off-gas stuff like BPAs. So we'll talk about that later. I'll give you suggestions for different types to use. What that suggestion is meaning, it doesn't mean to go out and purchase plastic for that application. Ideally, you're using something that you're upcycling around your house or that you can upcycle from somebody else. And secondly, the two most common plastics that are used is actually those black floor coverings that's like a mulch. It's a weed suppression cover. That is type 4. It's typically type, like double check, but it's typically type 4 low density polyethylene. And as well, the row covers, the clear row covers that people will typically use, that also is type 4. So when I'm talking about the types down the road, you kind of will know where those fit in and whether they're safe or not to use. Okay, and just quickly navigating this video, I'll put something in the description, but generally the first roughly 8 minutes or so is talking about the properties of plastic, the science properties, how they degrade, pathways they get into the human body. And then for the second half of the video, I start talking about the types of plastic, which ones you can use in which applications, what common examples of them are so that you can kind of identify them. And you can always identify them by looking at the little recycling triangle with the number inside of it. So I want to empower you with that information so that you don't have to memorize stuff. You can maybe use this video as a reference guide down the road. You can skip to the second half. You can check out what type of plastic you're looking at. Skip to that half, find out if it's safe to use in the garden, and there you go, you're good to go. You can use this video as a reference tool. So if you don't care about any of the science stuff on why plastics are harmful, skip to the, roughly the second half of this video when I'm starting to talk about the different types of plastic. That's kind of where the, the good information that you will use every day in your garden is located. Okay, so with all that said up front, I just wanted to clarify all that. Let's get into the video. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Hey, welcome back, guys. I wanted to do this video outside, but it's so cold that I actually came back inside, and I'm just gonna sit and do it like this. I'll splice in some B-roll so that it's not just my ugly mug talking to you. But what I wanted to talk about today was back to gardening topics. A really good video I've been meaning to do for a long time, and now is the perfect time to do a video like this, is I wanna talk about plastic in your gardens. Okay, so one of the consultation jobs I have coming up, this actually popped up. The person that I'm speaking of has some buried plastic in their yard. One's a PVC pipe, and one is, and I believe it's unused, and one is just another piece of plastic that's buried under the ground. And they were kind of asking, should we think of pulling this stuff up? The PVC pipe's a little more difficult. I thought, what, this is actually a really good idea for a video because this is the stuff that pops up when we're starting our own project. Okay, now before we talk about the types of plastic, I need to talk about the pathways that they can get into our bodies. It would be something like freeze thawing, where you have these long polymer chains of a plastic and they can get cracked off and those microplastics can get loose and then ingested. There's radiation-based attacks where a high energy photon will hit the atoms of a molecule enough to ionize it and send an electron out. The resulting atom is brittle or unstable, and then it can crack from there. This is basically ultraviolet embrittlement, and this is one way that plastics can get degraded. There's temperature-based degradation. Typically, these will involve some kind of gradient style diffusion type of process that increases as the molecules around it are warmed up and thus moving faster, as well as some chemical reactions that have a latent heat requirement where you actually need a higher temperature in order for those chemical processes to continue. So temperature is an important part of some of these plastics degrading. And lastly is the actual chemical processes. So this would be like a plastic bottle sitting in the ground, and then the acids of the bacteria and fungi breaking up parts of the plastic. Okay, so once that plastic is in the soil, it'll have a residence half-life for how long it'll basically stay in the soil. Okay, so for half-lives, the reason why I really want to talk about this is because sometimes you'll see on some websites plastic's got a really short half-life, so don't worry about it. Well, my problem is, it's got a short half-life because it's, changing or biodegrading, or maybe it's water soluble and it's washing away, it's not in your soil anymore. Well, but like, where did that go? It went somewhere. So it went into our fresh lakes and rivers, and then it ends up in the bottom of an ocean somewhere. And we're finding microplastics in the bottom of our oceans where there's no right for any plastics to be there. So to me, that's not necessarily really a great argument, because I actually care about that. And then on the other side, for a very long half-life, that's fine if it's chemically stable, like say an EPDM liner outside of ultraviolet light. That's very stable. But if it is actually unstable and it is biodegrading, or it is degrading, and it will build up in the soil, but maybe not for 1,000 years, that still matters to me, because it's all about what kind of legacy am I leaving on the planet. I actually care about that. So to me, that's not necessarily a great argument. It can be part of an argument, but it's not a great one. It's a good argument for dose. You're maybe getting low dose and it's safe for you. But if that's still bioaccumulating in your soils, I don't really think that that's a great argument to use. Another thing that's important is the water solubility of the plastic. So during rain events, when the soil is getting saturated, if a plastic is water soluble, it will be kind of picked up by the water, dissolve inside the water, and then be carried away as the water goes. This isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing for your garden because the toxin is leaving your garden, but it's not a good thing for wherever that toxin is going towards, typically into freshwater systems like rivers, lakes, and oceans. But the water solubility of the actual toxin does have an impact on whether it's safe to have that plastic in your garden. For me, that doesn't change the fact whether I would use that plastic, say, as a border of my garden, because I would just choose to use something that is actually fully stable and won't get washed and leached away into the environment, because I actually care about that. So some of these plastics will have that property, and I'm going to recommend not to use them. And it's because there are actually good plastic options available that we could if we could use those ones instead, why not? Let's do that. Okay, and the last factor to consider is that the plastic has to go from the soil to the root of the plant, and then it has to be pulled up the plant into the stem, into the leaves, to be consumed as, say, like a green leaf, or into the fruit or vegetable to be consumed by the human. So some of the plastic microparticles actually can't go through that pathway. And it's been shown, scientifically that yes, it exists in the soil, but largely it remains in the soil. For those, typically I'm gonna still say don't use them. And again, it still falls, so even though it's safe for humans, still follows along with my other principle of, I still don't believe it belongs in our soils, in our grounds, and some of these plastics can actually be reused and recycled in other ways. They shouldn't end up in the soil. They could be converted to a more useful process with some of the, exciting technology like fungi that eats actual plastics as well, and then turns them into inert substances. Okay, the chemical concerns with the plastics really comes down to pretty much two main categories: phthalates and bisphenol. Now, phthalates are found in pretty much everything around the world, like that we're exposed to. It's been found in deodorants, hairsprays, fragrances, skin creams, food packaging. So this one here, it kind of is filed under the category of it's all around us, and we should try to minimize the amount that we ingest or are exposed to. So for any of the plastic products in this video that contain phthalates, I am going to say to avoid them. And I'll talk about that when I talk about the different types. Okay, now bisphenols are typically not, it's also BPA, sometimes you'll hear BPA. It's typically not in a whole lot of food grade style products, but it is starting to show up in a lot of those new fabric planting pots, so just be aware of that. Because of the health concerns with BPA, two similar but less known chemicals, BPS and BPAF, are being substituted in, but I think that kind of falls under the category of we just don't know enough about these things yet. We really need to just minimize exposure to this to the extent practical, and I'll talk about that when I suggest types of plastics to use where the BPA is pretty much locked up to the extent practical. Okay, so now that we know some of the chemicals that are involved in it, as well as the pathways to get inside of us or to exit our system into the environment, let's talk about the types of plastics that's actually out there. So there's 7 main types. They're kind of binned into these categories. First type, type 1, is polyethylene terephtalates. And yes, if you're wondering, I did shoot that clip multiple times. Now, to know if your plastic product is PET, look for the little recycling sign. If it's a recycling sign with a 1 in it, then it's a PET product. Typical things that are PET would be something like a peanut butter plastic container, or those thin, squishy water bottles. I mean, we say they're bad for a reason. It's because this is basically the reason here. Other things would be ketchup containers, maybe juice containers. So try to avoid those if possible. I know a lot of people like to take those, fruity juice jars and then do their seed starts inside those or turn them into like a little greenhouse. This is actually a terrible idea because PET actually breaks down fastest at high temperatures. So if you have PET plastics, you want to keep them out of the sun. These are water bottle style seed starting systems. You want to stay away from that. So let's go into 2 types that are actually better suited for that purpose. Okay, if you look at that little recycling triangle and you look at the number inside, number 2 and 4 are pretty much safe to go. They're good to go. This is what I recommend you use. So number 2 is high density polyethylene. So high density polyethylene would be stuff like those big plastic rain barrels. Those are made out of high density PE. And then also like, a really thick, sturdy, hard pot that a tree would come in. This is very, very good options for using inside of your garden. So if you want to bury pots, do say blueberries inside of a plastic container, make sure that, see if you can double check to see where the recycling, triangle is. Look for it too. That's a high density polyethylene, and that's what you want to do. Now, low density polyethylene is number 4. Low density polyethylene would be stuff like, if you picture like a chemist where they have like a little squishy water bottle, or just like a hockey water bottle, something like that. So something kind of squishy, semi-transparent, but also semi-rigid, not super squishy like like a thin water bottle. That's most likely recycling triangle number 4, low density polyethylene. This is also safe. Again, relatively safe to the point where if you care about this stuff being in your soil, you also better never drink tap water. You better never buy food from a grocery store. You have to take it to an extreme level. This would be like You know, someone's so scared of getting cancer from the sun that they literally hide in a basement, right? At some point we have to get exposed to some of this stuff. It's the reality of living in the world that we live in, and dose matters. And the dose that you will get from something like this is actually very low, like orders of magnitude lower than something dangerous, like, you know, not dangerous, but more dangerous, such as PET. Okay, now I skipped over number 3 because I wanted to talk about the two polyethylene plastics together. Number 3 is PVC, so polyvinyl chloride. This plastic has those phthalates in them. It's like a plasticizer, and it's used in the manufacturing to kind of stiffen and harden it up. This will actually degrade and come out of, you know, as the plastic degrades, it'll come out and then be, you know, available in the soil, water soluble, and it can actually get transmitted into stuff like strawberries, carrots, root crops like potatoes, turnips, that sort of stuff, parsnips. So avoid using any PVC piping in your gardens. Now, if you do have PVC piping in your gardens or buried in the soil and you know it's there, then I suggest that you just stay away from doing stuff like, you know, any kind of root crop or any kind of, you know, shallow ground level plant where the toxin can go from the roots straight into the plant in a fairly short pathway, compared to, say, a giant like nut tree or a huge like persimmon tree where the toxin has to travel all the way up the trunk up to high branches way up high. It's fighting that gradient of gravity, and just, you know, the longer chance that it can diffuse. Remember, all of this stuff, it's about dose. Our bodies are actually tremendously robust to handle a lot of this stuff. If you can, though, avoid using PVC. If you have PVC buried in your gardens, try to make that area the walking path. And then try to, as you get further away from that area in the walking path, you don't have any kind of root crops. Maybe you just have some ornamental nature support plants that you're not going to actually physically consume. And then further away from that, maybe you get into some bushes, and then further away from that, you get into some trees. So use that as, you know, your smart design if you're stuck in the situation where you know you have PVC buried. Okay, item number 5, which again, you're looking at that recycling diagram with the number in it. Number 5 will be polypropylene. So PP for short. Polypropylene is stuff like, you know, a kid's lunch sandwich box. This is food grade, it's food safe, it's very stable, and something like this is actually safe in your garden as well. A big Tupperware dish, like a Rubbermaid dish, that's typically probably made out of low density polyethylene, so type 4, also safe. These harder plastics, the polypropylenes, they're also a pretty good choice for using in your gardens, you know, if you needed to. So if you wanted to use some kind of plastic border as a rhizome barrier, just double check that it's type 2, type 4, or type 5. So it's either low density or high density polyethylene, or it's polypropylene. Either of those will be good options for in the garden. Okay, type 6 is polystyrene. So this would be stuff like those little packing balls, styrofoam, you know, packing balls, styrofoam cups, but also can be things that you maybe wouldn't think is polystyrene, like say the tray that comes, you know, your meat from the deli, from the butcher would come in a polystyrene bottom plate. Now, I would say this one is probably the most contentious. Many places say that it's safe and healthy to use. Many places say that it's maybe not the best to use, that it's food grade safe, but, you know, you're getting some dose. So I would say, just personal opinion, stay away from it. You have many other good options, number 2, number 4, and number 5. Those are great options to use if you have to use them. Why mess with something where the jury's still out? So I would say polystyrene, you know, starting seeds in a styrofoam cup, just use something else. That's what I would do. You can do whatever you want, but I would say just use something else. So can I not just use a beer cup? Again, this is why I'm doing this video. I can't answer that question because some beer cups and some drinking cups are made out of other things. Now, chances are if it's used in a food industry to hold, actual drink, it's probably going to be type number 4. But just double check. Look at the bottom of the cup and look for that recycling bin thing, or the recycling number with the number inside of it. Look for 2, 4, or 5 and use that in your garden. If you don't see a 2, 4, or 5, you see something else, skip it. Okay, now the last type is type 7, and this is just basically other. So if you look at the bottom of your plastic thing and it says type 7, stay away from it. The reason why I'm saying this is because this giant bin of plastics could be anything and you don't know what it is. It could be something, it could be like a biodegradable plastic, which technically is fairly safe, but at the same time, remember that stuff is actually biodegrading into other compounds, and then those compounds could be potentially dangerous as well, not safe for human use. And to be honest, like, there's other options to just use those as well. It could also be like polycarbonate, and polycarbonate is one of the worst plastics humans have ever created. So just be really, really careful with number 7, and if you see recycling plastic type number 7, don't use it at all. And it's not just about BPA, it can also be about other chemicals like antimony. So type 1, for example, type 1 PETs at high temperatures releases a ton of antimony, and that is not good for your health as well. So it's not just BPA, it's not just phthalates, it's a whole bunch of chemicals that are used in this. And in general, the type 2, I know I've said this a bunch of times, but I want to nail it and hammer down. Type 2, type 4, and type 5 are safe for your gardens, or at least, 99.9% safe. And if you want to get safer than that, you better make some wide-scale life choices and changes in your life, because you're exposed to plastics even in your deodorant, for example. You might not have realized that. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope this video was useful to people. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.